Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, January 9th, 2014. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Ken Schramm, author of the Compleat Meadmaker and owner of Schramm's Mead, joins us to talk about his new commercial venture and to answer your questions about making the best meads at home. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. We have a show page on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing. We're on Google Plus, too. And thanks to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of shopping at Amazon, go to our website first, basicbrewing.com. Click on our ad. That will take you to Amazon. You can shop as you normally do. You won't notice any difference. It won't cost you any more, but we will get a commission off of what you purchase. So we greatly appreciate your support when you do that. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too, that work in a similar way. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes and our Android app on Amazon.com. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, and we're in the Stitcher app. We're on the Windows Phone directory, too. We're just everywhere. Check out our brewer's logbook at basicbrewingshop.com. In the front is a blank calendar that you can use to track your fermentations and plan your brews. And there is room in the back to log the details of up to 50 batches of brew. And a bunch of you are getting 2014 started with new logbooks. If you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support. Thanks to everybody who has done so already. And finally, protect your precious beer with one of our growler bags. Check those out at basicbrewingshop.com. Those were popular amongst the winners of the disaster show this past year. Most wanted the bags. Ken and I had a great long conversation packed with good info, so I want to get to it quickly, but I do have a bit of good news first, locally. Last week I said that Tanglewood Branch, one of our local breweries and brew pub, actually, here in northwest Arkansas, was about to go under. Well, this week we see that Tanglewood has reached the crowdfunding goal that it had, so it gets a second chance at life, which is really good news for Northwest Arkansas people. J.T. Wampler, the owner, is planning to expand production and refigure what he offers at the pub. So I hope that the new changes and the new infusion of cash will mean a more prosperous 2014 for Tanglewood Branch. Congratulations to Wamp and to everybody who participated in the campaign. Looking forward to big things in 2014 from Tanglewood Branch. Now let's talk to longtime mead expert, now commercial meadery owner, Ken Schramm. Ken Schramm, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thank you very much, James.
Been wanting to have you on for a long time.
Yeah, I've been a little busy these past few months.
Yeah, you've been going pro, as they say. Tell us about that.
Well, we have established a small meadery. We've got about 6 barrels of capacity, and we are making mead and operating a tasting room out of a location in Ferndale on 9 Mile Road, if any of your listeners are local to the Detroit area. And we're making a batch a month and bottling it and doing a lot of it by hand, which has turned out to be very, very labor intensive. Mm. We're kicking out product.
And you what size bottles are you bottling in?
Both 375s and 750s, but really our staple has come to be the 375. We're kind of thinking of that as the standard mead bottle size.
Wow. You can get a lot of those in 6 barrels.
There are about 2,000 or so. Once we're making melomels, and we're using real fruit. So after the headspace that you've got to leave, and then the space that the spent fruit has taken up, we end up with about 200 gallons after all the sedimentation losses and things that take place during a regular mead making batch occur, we end up with about 200 gallons, which is about 2,375s, and it's a lot of bottling.
Are these hand corked, or how are they capped?
Oh yes, oh yes. We do have an Enologica Mori 6-head bottle filler, but we have a standard Italian floor corker, and we apply the capsules one at a time. We've got an Italian encapsulator as well, but yeah, it's all being done with. At this point, 6 people is the optimal setup to have one person filling. And the other thing that we do that is very labor intensive and that we probably should stop doing, but that we're doing in the name of quality, is that we top up every bottle. Every bottle filler will put pretty much within 5%, which is I think what the feds say you've got to be, of the 375 milliliter mark for a 375 or similarly for a 750. But we want to top up. The best winemakers in the world leave remarkably little headspace in their bottles so that if they are in fact going to get laid down for 5 or 6 years or 10 or 20 years, they don't end up becoming oxidized. And we're doing that for our customers. We want them to have a good fill. We want them to make sure that they feel like they've gotten their money's worth, but we also want a bottle that they can lay down and make a mead de garde if they choose to, and be comfortable with the fact that there's not a ton of ullage or airspace in there.
Is it a little bit intimidating? I mean, you've been known as, one of, if not the mead expert, because you wrote the book,
right?
The Compleat Meadmaker. Is it intimidating going pro and putting your stuff out there so everybody can taste it, not just your friends and neighbors?
Yeah, I think intimidating is a good word. And the other word that I've thought a lot lately, James, is vulnerable, because, you're putting yourself out there. And this is true for everybody. Everybody that's making a product is literally bearing their soul to the world and is saying, have at it, make your comments as you will. I can do a few things to protect myself, but that's what we've always, that's kind of been my modus operandi, or my philosophy about this whole thing since I got started, is I'm going to get the best things I possibly can. If I start with great honey and I start with great fruit and I use really sound process, I have a very good chance of making something that's tasty and that people will enjoy. But it's still no guarantee. And de gustibus, as they say, everybody gets their own right to pass judgment on the things that they taste. And it's just as you said, it's pretty intimidating. It feels pretty vulnerable.
Well, one thing is that you've got a good palate, I'm assuming, so that you're not going to put bad stuff out there. If a batch goes wrong horribly for some reason, the public's not going to see it. Yeah,
well, I mean, I'll be honest with you, and it happened literally this weekend. We had been bottling, and I frankly I forgot to CO2 jacket a partial tank that we had bottled most of, and I had a 50-odd or 60-odd barrel tank, and I left a bunch. I left about 12 or 15 gallons in the bottom of the barrel, planning to get back to it, and didn't get back to it as quickly as I had intended to. And when we got back to it, it was oxidized, and it wasn't. It tasted really good, but the aromatics were not pure, and I could tell that it wasn't going to go great places over the next 5 years, and we dumped it. And that's a few $100s worth of meat down the tube there, but you have to do that. When I got started, Chris Fry from the Ann Arbor Brewers Guild and one of the AHA Board of Advisors group managed to help me get a chance to talk to Jim Cook from Sam Adams, and Jim said, you can't be afraid to dump something. You have to do it. When you have to do it, you do it, and you move ahead. Don't get all teary-eyed or anything. Just be calculating about it, get it done, and move ahead. And that's what we do.
What varieties are we looking at?
Right now, we started with meads that have some significant residual sugar in them. We wanted things that we could get to market that didn't have to age didn't have to have a prolonged aging curve. We are making a raspberry, a blackberry. I'm making a Balaton cherry mead that we call the Statement, which is Balaton is a variety of cherry that's grown primarily in Michigan. It's a Morello type, meaning that it's got dark flesh and dark juice, and it has probably just a tiny bit more sugar to it and a slightly lower acidity profile, but it's still a tart cherry, and it makes for a really delicious mead. I'm making the Heart of Darkness, which is the same Heart of Darkness recipe, which is pretty much very proprietary. And then we're doing a ginger as well that's made with grated ginger in pretty much obscene quantities.
Now, you did a collaboration with Bee Nectar to produce Heart of Darkness a few years ago, right?
Yes, yes, and essentially that was me making the mead, and utilizing the ingredients that I selected in my whole process, and then essentially, pointing to the fermenters when I was done and saying, "Okay, Brad, now you may bottle that," and it worked out really well. I mean, those first two batches came out beautifully. Well, they came out like the Heart of Darkness. I mean, it was just essentially me using the ingredients that we use and the process that I use, and just doing it with Brad watching, and that was the process there, and it got done. They came out very well. And I also did a batch of the ginger, which is essentially the same recipe that I'm using right now. It's the Schramm recipe for ginger, and I released one batch of that with them as well. And at this point, there are a few of those bottles of the Heart of Darkness floating around, and I don't know if there's really a mead aftermarket, but those are pretty dear. And not financially, but I mean just in terms of their scarcity, and then we released the first batch of ours pretty much as quickly as we could get it together, and then the second batch is due to be released in the second batch as a Schramm's product is due to be released in a few weeks.
Is that collaboration what gave you kind of the confidence to go forward by yourself?
I honestly, I don't know what the tipping point was for me to go forth by myself. I knew I had a good product. I mean, I'd been running the Mazer Cup for years and years, and I'd tasted an awful lot of mead, so I knew where my quality was in the spectrum of mead deliciousness. I did need to have. I had to get my kids through college. Was one of the things. Was one of the, you could say, one of the excuses. But I needed to make sure that I could get myself to the point where I had some economic flexibility to go ahead and drop cash into it, and also some flexibility in terms of my schedule and my time.
So what's for any of the mead makers out there who are thinking about going pro, what was the biggest challenge? Was it setting up the business, or was it scaling up the recipes? Were there any surprises?
No, it was setting up the business, scaling the recipes. If you've got good recipes, since extraction, unlike, pardon me for speaking in sentence fragments, but unlike brewing, where scale can make huge differences in things like mash efficiency and hop extraction, and there are just really big nonlinear components to scale. In mead making, essentially every recipe that I have scaled from 5 gallons, usually I've scaled from 5 to 10 and 15, and then from 15 to 200, and they scaled completely linearly. And the results were extremely predictable. There were only just tiny minor differences in the finished product. So that was not the bigger issue. The bigger issue for me was all of the, it's a huge undertaking. There are so many elements in making the business happen, in licensing and location and all of the clearances that you've got to get from the state, your Department of Agriculture and the local municipality. It's just an endless set of tasks that have to be approached and checked off. And that was, it was daunting. It was, I would say that the biggest thing, James, was that I was doing everything for the first time.
Mm.
So I had gone from, as a, I'd made hundreds of batches of mead as an amateur. And now everything I was doing was essentially completely new, save for scaling up on, But how do you move? How do you move a barrel of honey? Well, you've got to buy a honey pump. Well, where do you get a honey pump? Every individual task that was associated with getting the meadery up and running was brand new. I felt like I was 5 years old. I felt like I was a first grader. The statement I've made so many times is, each time I wake up in the morning, I feel like that kindergartner holding his lunch tray at the end of the line, looking into the cafeteria full of people, hoping that somebody will kind of wave me over to sit down at their table, because it was. I mean, that was the intimidating part. You want to talk about intimidating?
Yeah,
everything, every tax form, everything.
Well, speaking of intimidating, it's fairly intimidating for me to talk to you, because I've talked to brewers over the years, and I've brewed a bunch of home brew, and so I kind of what I don't know I can kind of fake my way through.
Sure.
And I've made meads, but not a whole bunch. I've made some good ones. I've made some bad ones. But, when I talk to mead makers who really know what they're doing, it's intimidating because, like you say, when you're learning something new for the first time, it's intimidating. And
Yep.
So, nowadays, I mean, my first batch of mead was a kit, from the local homebrew store, and you just mix the honey with the water, you put a little yeast, you put the nutrient, you let it go, and after a while you got good mead. Nowadays, people talk about pH, they talk about which nutrients to add, the staggered yeast nutrients or not, and it's like, there's so much information out there that it is intimidating. So I asked, I went out there on Twitter this morning, and I asked the listeners out there to send you questions to make sure that I'm covering the bases. I'm asking what people want to know. So do you want to just jump right into those?
Sure. But let me make one comment about that, though.
Okay.
My take on the situation with anxiety in mead making is that you just got to let it go. Just let it go. The worst thing that can happen is that maybe you waste $50 or $60 worth of ingredients that you put into a batch. That's the worst thing that can happen. And $60 is that's a tank of gas anymore, Mm-hmm. At this point, there's just no real value in adding anxiety to mead making. If you view it as a $60 learning experience that may end up with some great results at the end of it, it's all worth it. And you just don't need to add the anxiety to it. I learned the hard way. You just don't need to do it. There's no point in it. And once I did that, then I just sort of let myself over to the concept of finding good ingredients and understanding what the good processes are. And those two things are just so much simpler in mead making than they are in brewing. If anything, brewing to me has always been far more anxietous with all of its mash temp, break point, all of those, where rests and stops and etc. So yeah, I just leave the anxiety out of my mead.
So relax, don't worry, have a mead.
There you go. What's the worst that can happen?
Let's see. Mays on Twitter says, can you ask him to go into specifics regarding nutrient additions? So right off the bat,
Sure.
we hit one of the things that I'm most anxious about.
Sure. Well, there are kind of three approaches to nutrient additions. The first one is the one I kind of by default ended up with in the book, because I really didn't know much about staggered nutrient additions until after the book had gone to press. And that's just add it all at the beginning. Add a couple of teaspoons of diammonium phosphate or some form of yeast nutrient and some micronutrient, and off you go. And frankly, I made great mead that way for a long time. That was the big switch in my mead making, was when I went. Well, I say that the big switch was two big switches. Was when I went from boiling to not boiling, and when I went from not using nutrient to using nutrient. Once I had done that and started adding the nutrient, my meads went from pretty much average to good to really good. And so that was the big deal. So that's step one is the easiest way to just get it done with and move ahead. Then there are stagnant nutrient approaches, and the two that I know of are the one that High Test has advocated, and that is to do one small addition at the beginning and another addition at 1/3 sugar break, or the 1/3 sugar depletion point. And my approach is a little bit different. I break things down into 4 or 5 additions, take the entire balance of the nutrient that I'm going to use to try and get to about 300 parts per million of free amino nitrogen, and add it in either 4 or 5 increments. And that you can even do it, you can even break it up even further and break it down into 10 or 12 increments and add them every 12 hours. And that's kind of a just-in-time approach to adding the nutrients, so that you prolong the growth phase of the yeast population. But all 3 of those approaches, or maybe even a little more than 3, but all 3 of those approaches will make really good mead. The key is that you get that free amino nitrogen into the yeast, because if you've read the optimizing fermentation article I did, honey musts are just ridiculously deficient in free amino nitrogen. Maybe 20 parts per million, 24 in a really dark, robust honey. And when you think that a 12% alcohol beverage fermentation really needs about 300 parts per million, you can see that yeast is going to struggle if you don't provide it some additional nutrient source. So yeah, I myself, the approach I take is to use diammonium phosphate and Fermaid K, and I strongly recommend that if you're interested in that, Google optimizing honey fermentation and Ken Schramm, and you'll come up with the article. It's also on the archives of the Zymergy sort of classic articles. It's in there. The key is getting those micronutrients as well as the nitrogen. There are other approaches, and one of the ones that I'm going to be experimenting with soon is a new substance called Fermaid O, which is also from Lal van Lallemond, and it is an organic nutrient source. It's all fermentation byproducts, and I don't know. I'm interested in that. I'm interested in the concept of organic production of meads and low or no chemical addition production. I don't know if it's still a manipulation if you're one of those into the vernacular of the natural wine crowd. It's still a manipulation to add additional nutrient, but it's a little less harsh. So, but anyways, my approach is to get up to 300 parts per million. Like I said, the long form explanation of it is really well laid out in that optimizing fermentation article. I don't want to go into all the details here, but all 3 systems work. Just make sure you take it on.
But what advantage does the staggered nutrient addition, what does that give you? Is it mostly just time?
Well, the thing that Clayton Cohn identified, and he was one of several people who have identified this, is that the longer you keep the yeast population in its reproductive phase, the more effectively it will metabolize the sugars into alcohol. And as long as you keep providing the nitrogen, then the yeast stays in that reproductive phase longer, or a larger percentage of the yeast population. A certain population will go into that anaerobic phase, but a bunch of it will stay in the reproductive phase. And the nitrogen is needed because what happens during that reproduction is that the yeast needs to really build up its cell wall mass. The cell wall is it's just the critical element in healthy fermentation, because that's how the cell moves the sugar from outside the cell into the cell, and that's how it expels the carbon dioxide and the alcohol. It all moves through the membrane, and it needs to do that seamlessly. And it gets harder and harder for the bilayer, which is what that membrane is, to do that as the gradient changes. When the amount of alcohol goes up, eventually you get to the point where you are doing you're using a differentially permeable membrane and ejecting against a concentration gradient, meaning that there's a lower concentration of alcohol inside the cell than there is outside the cell. And the same thing will be true with carbon dioxide. So you're pushing against, you're trying to push something into a more concentrated solution, and that's work. And you want that cell wall to be really vibrant to do that. All of the cell wall mass that you get in all of the cells that are working in that yeast population comes from the cell's ability to grab lipoproteins, to grab nitrogen and create and use the amino acids to create lipids and build up that cell wall, because each time the cell splits and reproduces, it doesn't get more once it's split. Once it's gone into some sort of a metabolic phase, now it's just there. It's not building up more cell wall mass. So as all of those cells reproduce, they need to have the sources of the nitrogen they need to build up the cell wall mass that they're going to need when they move into fermentation. So that's the real critical element of those free amino acids. And the number one amino acid in honey is proline, and it's not assimilable by the yeast. So you've got to come up with other sources.
We got some fun questions, David, and I'm at a position where I'm using my reading glasses. I'm like halfway between the computer glass and so my bifocals are struggling here. David Withers says, I made a mead 2 days ago and was a little short of honey, so added maple syrup to get the specific gravity up. Was that a good idea? So have you made a mead with maple syrup before?
I have not made one myself, but I've had several very good ones, and I've had a couple that I didn't enjoy as much. And that's one of the challenges that we as mead makers face. There will, for example, I'm sure, over the next 15 or 20 years, and after the course of a lot of experimentation, what we'll find out is there are going to be some yeast strains that do a great job with maple syrup and others that don't. Just the same way there are yeast strains that make great Weizens and yeast strains that don't. So that body of knowledge is not readily available, and we've got to get there through repeated experimentation. If he's picked a good yeast strain, and I hope he has, and it'll be a bit of a shot in the dark, but they can be really delicious. The two flavors blend quite nicely.
And that's assuming that he's using real maple syrup and not the high fructose corn syrup artificial stuff. Or is there a difference in the fermentation of those two?
Well, I don't know if there's a difference in the fermentation, because they're essentially both going to. Well, the sugar blends will be different, I should say. Yeah, the sugar blends will be different, but no, it's going to be the bigger difference is going to be in the flavor, and I'm not a fan of high fructose corn syrup.
I guess the bottom line is if the mead comes out well, if it tastes good, then it was a good idea.
Yep. You'll have to tell us the answer to that question.
That's right. He also says, what's the best honey in your eyes? And you don't want honey in your eyes. You want it in the mead.
True that. I have about 4 or 5 honeys that I really like. And they can even be variable too from batch to batch. Honey is if you're a wine fanatic, There's a term that gets bandied about pretty loosely called terroir.
Mm-hmm.
It's used to describe the influence of location and a lot of other things, some of which are sort of man derived, like the vineyard practices of the grower and the nature, but also the nature of the terrain and the location and the sun exposure and blah blah blah. All those sort of factors that determine what the grapes from a certain location will come out like. And that terroir term can really be applied to honey because the same situations are true there. There are different water sources that end up in the nectar that the bees collect. So the plants can be delivering a different sort of base element to the honey creation. And then there's what the plant itself does, and then the sun exposure and the amount of moisture that you've gotten through a given year. So from year to year and from location to location, different honeys, especially varietal honeys, can be very different. I am really fond of orange blossom, both Florida and California, and I scrutinize honeys based on the individual source. And I know most people don't have the advantage of being able to call up honey producers around the country and order honey and write it off on their taxes, but I can. And as can any legitimate meat maker, commercial meat maker. But I like orange blossom. I like raspberry blossom. I like blackberry. I like Tupelo. And then when it comes to wildflower, there are tremendous wildflower blends. Wildflower just means that it was sort of kind of the run of schedule, to use a broadcast term, the run of schedule collection by the bees, and it can turn out to be absolutely phenomenal. And as well, the impact of the beekeeping practices of the individual beekeeper and the extraction practices of the individual beekeeper can play a huge role in the quality of the honey that's finished. But the most important thing that I look for, especially in things like wildflower honey, is what are the aromatics like? You have to determine what's going to be left after the yeast strips through all the sugar, and I look for things that are absent the negative characteristics that will be really glaring at the end of the fermentation, meaning extreme woodiness, vegetal character, extreme maltiness. There are a number of honeys that have high diacetyl levels, and I it's kind of a process of elimination. I look for bright floral character, and I don't. It's not a perfect description of it, but if you think of the difference, for example, between daisies and carnations, daisies are kind of muddy when you smell them. They've got a really, sulfury character to them, and that's a character that can show up in honey. Whereas carnations are bright and they have a kind of a crisp, aromatic profile to them, and that's what I look for in a finished honey is that pleasantly floral character absent those other characteristics.
Can you make a good tasting mead out of bad tasting honey?
Can you make a good beer out of bad malt?
I'm going to say no.
I will agree.
Matt Whitey, who is a mead maker who's been on this show, Matt was on the show. He shared some Bochet meads with us, some meads made with burnt honey that were really interesting, and took a little. It was a little shock at first, but after you got off, that initial bump, they were really tasty. Matt Whitey says, "How do you clarify your meads on a commercial scale?"
I have not had to resort to anything yet, although I have a batch right now. Just because of the specific fruit I used, and I'm not going to get into details on this, but I'm going to have to fine it. And I will use commercial fining techniques. I will probably use polyclar or bentonite, and essentially follow the package instructions. I do believe in the notion that you can get a lot of clarity by using a positive and a negative, positively charged and a negatively charged fining agent in sequence, and and if I have to, I will do that. But that hasn't been an issue yet. I've got to deal with it right now, though. But yeah, I'll use finding agents, and if I need to, I'll purchase a filtration system. I have a cartridge filter that I can use, but it's an older system that I purchased used with a bunch of the equipment that I purchased when I started the meadery. And once again, we're into that realm of something you've never done before. So,
do you have buddies in the? I'm assuming the people at Bee Nectar might be able to help you out with some of this information.
yeah, and I'll talk to Paul EZ. I'll find out what he's doing. I think they've actually they're a much larger scale operation than I am. I mean, they're doing 1,000-gallon batches, and I'm doing 200 and 300-gallon batches. So they're then they're doing multiple fermenters, multiple 1,000-gallon fermenters, and I believe they've got a plate filter, which is different from my approach. So yeah, but I'll still go and I'll ask around, and there are a lot of other winemakers and mead makers in Michigan that I can call on, and I will.
Matt also asks, do you heat your meads at all? That's a big question.
Negamundo.
Not at all.
Nope.
Not even to help the honey integrate into the must.
I will get the honey up to maybe 90 degrees just so that it will flow if it's been crystallized, but I will only heat it until it becomes liquid, which almost always means that the temperature stays below 100 or 102.
And you're talking Fahrenheit.
Yep. And that will just be to be able to move the honey. And once the honey is moved, I mix my honey and my water with a Waring commercial immersion blender, which oxygenates the living crap out of it, pardon my vernacular, but whips so much air into it that I think it's pretty close to saturated, which I think is a great way to start, and it gets the fermentation off to a really vigorous start. So that's my approach. And even if the honey is still slightly crystallized, there's nothing that can withstand 12,500 RPMs.
Colin Sweet asks about yeast strains. Which do you prefer?
I'm fond of 3 or 4. I like Lalban 71B 1122. I like K1V 1116. I am a fan of a few different beer yeasts. 07 and 1056, that's a lager strain, and the standard American ale yeast. Those make very good meads. RC 212 makes really good meads if you're doing things that you intend to finish somewhat dry and have a lot of red fruit character. Let's see what else. There is a French Sauterne yeast called VL3 that is really nice. Gordon Strong made a delightful Tupelo mead with VL3, and it's clean. It's clean and produces just dynamite aromatics.
I did a small batch of mead recently, just a 1-gallon batch with USO5, Safale USO5.
Mm-hmm.
Turned out pretty tasty, and it took it down from 1129 to 1050. So, did a pretty good job of eating those sugars.
Yeah, well, the thing I like about the ale yeasts and beer yeasts in general is that if you want some residual sugar, stay away from EC 1118. You'll notice that didn't make my list. I'm not fond of EC 1118. It is an aggressive yeast, and it works very well on huge character-filled Chardonnay grapes from Montrachet and on Champagne, on Pinot Meunier and Pinot Gris Pinot Noir are things that are used in champagne making, but that's not what we're starting with here. We're starting with some delicate honey and stuff that doesn't have a whole lot of residual character. And so if you use something like EC1118, you can end up with lighter fluid when you're done. And
Mm.
I just don't want that to happen to my honey. So no, but ale yeasts, yeah, I love the fact that they leave uh, both the sugar character and those some really pleasant esters.
Yeah, this mead is, at 1050 you'd think it'd be cloying, but it's not at all. It's nicely sweet, but not overly sweet. I was real happy with it. Turned out 10.8% ABV, I figure. So
That's delightful.
yeah, it's just I had done a couple of batches that didn't turn out very well. They were thin, and there was kind of a rubber bandy character.
Yup.
That it just scared me for a while. I thought I'd lost my touch with the meads because my first batches of meads, way back in the day, were wonderful.
Right.
So, I mean, if you taste a mead that is thin and rubber bandy, what goes through your mind about what went wrong?
Well, there are two or three things that I'm concerned with at that point. One of them, the first suspect, is yeast selection. If you use something that was too aggressive for the honey that you've got, and essentially burned through all of the sugar and left only some phenolic, like you say, rubber band or Band-Aid character, that's a question. The yeast nutrition and the duration of the fermentation is suspect for me. If you've got a long, drawn out fermentation, the yeast may, well, from personal experience, when I had long, drawn out fermentations, the yeasts produced the kinds of characters that you're talking about, and they're doing it because they've run out of all the nutrients that they need, and they are struggling to move through the EMP pathway smoothly, and they're kicking out off flavors and higher alcohols, fusel alcohols, and that's what I frequently suspect. And then the last thing is that you've selected a honey that was absent enough oomph, and that's where picking sort of a nondescript, lightweight honey, light in color or light in character honey, can create a situation where what's left when you're done is not particularly appealing.
Hmm. And I think also I wasn't starting off with enough honey. I think my starting gravities were just not high enough, and the yeast was able to get through all of that, and there was nothing left.
Yep.
So that's why I bumped this up. My wife came home from the farmer's market with 2 pints of this this local honey and said, "Can you make a mead out of this?" And I said, "Yes, dear. I can."
Right.
Sure. When your wife asks you to do something homebrew related, you encourage that. So, just wound up with basically a little over a 6-pack of mead. But boy, it's tasty.
Yeah.
And bottled in the 12-ounce brown beer bottles and capped it.
Sure.
So.
Yep.
Jim Ferrier asks, "I'm curious about recommendations for degassing." And any honey varieties. We talked about the honey varieties to avoid. I think we talked about that. But degassing, I got a couple of questions about that.
Yeah, and I am a big fan of degassing, and that is one of the reasons that I do as part. It's an additional benefit of the kind of multi-stage staggered nutrient addition that I do. If I do a nutrient addition every day, or for that matter, even every 12 hours, it gives me a chance to get in there and liberate the CO2 out of those meads. And that's really helpful for getting the fermentation to happen smoothly. Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that. You want to get you can use drill attachments that, the paddle drill attachments, or you can use the immersion blender if you're really crazy, but you'll end up with meat on the floor. No, you can do those things. Myself, I just sanitize a slotted. I went to the restaurant supply store, bought myself a solid stainless steel slotted spoon, and I stir it briskly every 12 hours and get that CO2 out of there. And yes, strong advocate of that. It makes a big difference. I do that for about 5 days, like I said. and then I seal it back up and let it go.
Adam Mills asks about what's the key to spicing mead.
Well, everybody has a different approach, and there is no right or wrong. I'll tell you what I do, but it doesn't mean I haven't had delicious meads that other people have done other ways. The approach that I've settled on is that I generally make a traditional mead first, and then I use a muslin tea bag, and I create a spice blend by sitting down at the table with, well, first of all, I get good spices. Certainly the additional few pennies that you're going to spend, or even the couple of dollars you're going to spend if you're making a $5 batch, you're not going to remember that 5 years from now, but you're certainly going to be able to taste it.
Mm-hmm.
So I buy really good spices. Lately, the spice vendor that I had at my local farmers market has gone out of business, and I use Penzeys now for most of my spices. But you get good spices, and then you sit down with small, like quarter teaspoon quantities, or I actually have a gram scale, and measure out small quantities of them, and then blend them together. If I'm doing a single variety, I mean most of the time is spent picking the type of cinnamon, for example, I'd like to use at the Penzeys, trying to figure out which one has the character. And then if I'm going to blend spices together, I start with small quantities of the spices and blend them together in proportion, and then I scale up from there, so that if I end up with 2 grams of this and 1 gram of this and 3 grams of this, then I make a larger blend, put it in the muslin bag, and I put the muslin bag in the carboy. If I'm using 5-gallon batch quantities here, and I let it sit there, and I wine thief off a little bit every 2 or 3 days, and just get a sample of it to try and understand if it's reached the saturation level that I'm looking for. If it's gone for 4 or 5 tastings, if the spice has been in there for a week and a half now, and it doesn't seem to be extracting anything more, I'll put together another blend and start with a new set of spices. But then I just let it go until it's hit basically the level I want, or maybe just a tad over, because the spice character will diminish over time. And then I pull that bag out and I bottle.
Is there a rule of thumb of how many grams per gallon, or I guess it depends on the spice?
No, my theory is you can undershoot readily. I generally start with about a total mixture of about a tablespoon in that muslin bag when I get started, and that may be 10 or 12 grams. But the key is to not put so much in there that you come back 3 days later and you've overshot your mark.
And of course, I can't let you get away without talking about fruit.
Oh, well, that's kind of my weak spot. Yeah.
Talk about burying the lead. Share with us some general tips about fruit.
The more you can do yourself, the better your finished product will be. If you can't grow it yourself, if you can go to a U-pick and find places that are growing different varieties and find the one that you like best and pick them all when they're at peak ripeness, so much the better. I really think the key elements in fruit are variety and ripeness levels. And a lot of people leave those up to someone else, and the more control you can leverage over that, the better your mead is going to be. That's a lesson. That's a lesson we take from the great winemakers. Those people go to incredible lengths to secure the best clones and to make sure that they get treated exactly like they want, and that they get picked at absolute peak ripeness. and the more of that you can embrace and execute in your mead making practice, the greater the chance that you're going to make really good mead. That's the difference, for example, between the Heart of Darkness, which is hand tended at every possible turn, and the other batches that we make that are made with commercial fruit that we purchase, that we don't control. And you can taste the difference. I mean, it's just incredibly obvious which one has been mollycoddled and picked at the ultimate point of ripeness, and and the fruit's been picked, selected over a couple of times, and it's just eminently apparent when you get to the finished product, which one's been treated that way. So the more you can do, and especially if you're a home mead maker, that's the real joy of small batch production, is that you do have the opportunity then to go ahead and execute that kind of control. You even if you're just going down to the farmer's market instead of to the supermarket to buy your fruit, you can look around and taste multiple different samples and pick the ones that are really delivering massive flavor impact and the ones that are ripe right now. Or take the bushel of peaches home and allow them to ripen for a couple of days, and then make the mead when they are in peak form, as opposed to going to buy, the can of concentrate or the package of frozen peaches that someone else picked whenever they decided they were going to pick them, and prepared them however they decided to prepare them, and your level of control is you bought it or you didn't. The more you can do to pre-screen for quality, the better your finished product is going to be.
So how much fruit, how do you prepare the fruit, and when do you add it into the process?
I use a lot. Now that I'm a commercial mead maker, I'll use the definitive term, a lot.
A boatload.
I add my fruit at the beginning of the process at this point. I am utilizing essentially the same winemaking practice as is used for grape wines, which is get a bunch of really, really good fruit and ferment it. So that's my approach to that.
Do you puree, or do you...
Nope. I ferment on whole fruit.
Is it frozen before you? They say you need to freeze fruit to burst the cell walls beforehand.
That is not inaccurate, although with some fruits it's more effective than it is with others. Things like pitted cherries and raspberries and blackberries, it's very true. With things like peaches, it is less so, because it's a solid piece of fruit, and it's really difficult to extract as much flavor from sliced peaches as it is from other fruits. The challenge with purees is that they are, in fact, the fruit solids are already in suspension, and that's not what you want if you're going to get clear mead at the end of your process. Mm-hmm. So you're going to end up with huge amounts of sediment in any fruit that when you use a pureed product, and you should just plan on losing 20 to 35% of your batch to fruit solids because you started with puree.
Do you worry about wild organisms on your peaches, on your fruit?
Yes and no. There's always a chance that you're going to end up with some acetobacter or something else in there that's really not particularly pleasant. At this point, I'm not concerned about things like Brett. Once those take hold in your winery, you can have a big problem. But we're not using any wood right now in our production, so we don't have barrels that are harboring that stuff, and we're using the regular CIP processes for all of our stainless steel. So hopefully we're not dealing with that. My approach has been that I overpitch my yeast culture and try to get to the point where I have a really robust fermentation going really very quickly, and I try to overcome essentially all of the other competitive organisms that are there. If I can get to 12% alcohol before anything else gets a chance to take root, I can end up with a pretty stable product.
And on a homebrew scale, how many pounds per gallon are we talking about? for just a general rule of thumb?
It depends on what the fruit is. It really depends on what the fruit is. Some fruits, I just did a batch of raspberry that I did with 2 pounds per gallon. And it was a really, really firm, strong character fruit with low acidity, and it came out beautifully. I've used more than twice that.
One last question. Can you just email me the recipe for the Heart of Darkness so I can post it on the site?
I'll get right on that, James.
Worth a shot.
You'll have that before we get off the air. Or at least you'll have as much of it as you're ever going to see.
Which is a picture of the label. Now, I've had that stuff. I've been lucky enough to have a little taste. Poured by you, I believe, at one of the homebrew conferences. And, man, talk about, something to live up to. That's wonderful stuff. And since, speaking of the conference, it's going to be in your neck of the woods.
It is.
Are you going to be there pouring on Pro Night?
Well, that's going to depend on whether or not I'm selected as a presenter. I have submitted a proposal, and I was hoping to talk about honey. I've been doing a little bit of reading about that subject over these past 30 years, and I'm hoping that 25 years. I'm hoping that they'll select me as a presenter, and if that's the case, then yes, we will make an attempt to appear at Pro Night. The caliber of our meads and the production cost of our meads, because of the way we're doing things, the honeys that we're picking and the fruits that we're using and the amounts of fruits that we're using, they're a little bit, the free samples thing is, I'm sure I could put it this way: if there are going to be 4,000 people at this event, I could, I'm sure, go through an entire month's worth of production in one evening, and that would pretty much cripple us. So,
yeah.
With the production size batches that we've got, so we're going to have to make some judicious decisions about what we're going to do. But yeah, I also do want to show up and give people a chance to taste some things.
Well, I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing you there, if not tasting. But surely, are your meads available in the Grand Rapids area?
Actually, not yet. We're self-distributing, and we're still with 200-gallon batches. We're hanging pretty close to home until we can get scaled up to a larger batch size. We're probably going to be sticking close to home. That doesn't mean I can't. I will be talking with the distributor and making sure we can get the product in for the event. Well, we can figure something out. Maybe in Michigan we can self-distribute, and maybe we make a special arrangement with a store in the Grand Rapids area.
Oh yeah,
to stock some products so that people that attend can get a bottle or two to take home.
That'd be great. Well, Ken, this has been a lot of fun, and I greatly appreciate your time, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much, James, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about Schramm's Mead. And if people are in the vicinity, we're at 327 West 9 Mile Road in Ferndale, and we're at Schramm's Mead, SCHRAMMSMEAD.com. You can like us on Facebook. You can support us any which way. We really appreciate it. We're a fledgling business just like everybody else is. Even if I may be a guy who wrote a book, we're working through the neophyte stages, and we really appreciate the support that our customers have given us.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, James.
Well, thanks again to Ken, and thanks for all the questions from Twitter. I got to most of them. Good questions. I have a goal of returning to more mead making myself in 2014, and I will put Ken's advice to good use. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Our Basic Brewing growler bags are available in our shop. Protect your precious homebrew and craft beers. You take it from place to place. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All-Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site, along with combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time. And you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store, too. Our Brewers Logbooks are in the store. Keep track of up to 50 batches of beer. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Breaking Bad, Los Pollos Hermanos Logo, Yellow Apron. I missed that show. And Welsh Corgi Puppies 18-month 2014 calendar, multilingual edition. But you don't, I mean, Welsh Corgis are cute in any language. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. Along with the Amazon link, or the associate links for the American Homebrewers Association, or Brew Your Own magazine as well. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.